Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine podcast. Today's guest is Laura Wilkes. Laura is a video and podcast producer who helps educators record content to grow their community. Before becoming a producer and setting up Communicating for Impact, Laura taught English, trained teachers and led academic teams across the world for 15 years. Laura is also the producer of the TESOL Pop podcast, which provides bite-sized episodes on teaching, trends, and careers for educators. I hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine podcast. And today I'm delighted to have from Communicating for Impact, a podcast and video producer, and it's Laura Wilkes. Laura, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. And I'm delighted to have you. And you're coming from beautiful Lucerne today. And I just looked at the tourist website. By its own reckoning, it's the most beautiful city in the world. Is that right?
You know, on a day like today, it's sunny outside. It's absolutely gorgeous. I definitely feel like I'm in one of the most beautiful parts of the world for sure.
And how did you end up in Switzerland?
Yeah, it's just one of those scenarios, you know, where you're kind of like looking for opportunities, and a job opportunity came up that happened to be in Switzerland, working for a company that I'd worked for before, and it was the right time to leave Hong Kong, which is where me and my husband were based at the time. There was a lot of change that was happening in Hong Kong, so we were ready for a change of scene, and so that's what made us take the opportunity that moved us with the job offer I got in the end of 2020, so just before Brexit. We moved to Switzerland. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know there's been a lot of to say the least, changes. We will a euphemism there for Hong Kong. But there's been quite a flight from Hong Kong, hasn't there? Yeah. What do you know, numbers, or have like anecdotally, like your friends leaving, or?
Yeah, definitely friends are leaving, and it is quite I would say it goes with the city anyway. A lot of people do come and go. It is that kind of transient city, but for me, what I've seen in terms of the trends, there does seem a lot more people moving on than what would normally be the case. I can't remember the numbers from the top of my head, but there have been quite a lot of educators leave and move to other places. And for my husband, who works in broadcasting, there's obviously a concern about, you know, broadcasters working in that environment, what you can and cannot say, given the national security law, and how difficult that can be sometimes to navigate and to interpret, to ensure that you are following what is agreed within the guidelines. That could be quite an added stress for people working in that kind of industry. So that's what kind of made us think, well, maybe now's the time to kind of try somewhere new.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we won't have any such strictures here today on the podcast.
Speak freely.
Speak freely. Speak your mind. Freedom of expression. So, I just wanted to start out, and I'm really delighted to have you on. Because I've seen some of your stuff on LinkedIn going around, and I've been doing this podcast for. I should have checked before I came on. I said this. I stop and start for about maybe 3 years, and just from my perspective, I've just restarted the podcast, and I'd been on a kind of hiatus for I don't know, maybe a year, and I'll have to apologize to the listeners. The first few podcasts have not been good. I've been very rusty, and but the question I wanted to ask, rather than blabbering on, was the main problem a lot of people have with podcasts is they don't stick at it very long.
Yeah, that is a big challenge, isn't it? But I think it is because you start out and you have these models of comparison that are led by big media houses like the BBC, like NPR for those in the US, that are on a weekly or even bi-weekly release schedule. So when we look to those, it kind of feels like, oh, well, maybe that's the model I have to follow to be a podcaster. And that's quite a quick way to end up burning out when you're just starting out and you probably have another job, you're busy with teaching, you've got a family life and all that sort of thing. So, one thing I do when I'm working with new podcasters is think about, what could you commit to? A mini series is a good place to start. Okay, let's plan 6 episodes. You'll learn a lot from 6. You'll get patterns and you'll evolve over that 6 and it's manageable. And you can then make a decision after that series, that standalone series has been out there to decide, well, okay, do I want to do another series? And if so, when? So not locking yourself into this kind of weekly or fortnightly release schedule, which can become really difficult to sustain when you're just starting out and you're probably just the only one creating the podcast as well. So you're responsible for the recording, the editing, the publishing, the promoting. That's a lot of hats to wear, isn't it? So I always encourage people to start a bit smaller so they can find what's consistency and sustainability means for them and to not, have to compare themselves. Comparison is a terrible thing, isn't it, when it comes to creativity and growth, but to find what really works for them and to lean into that.
Yeah, thief of joy, isn't it? The comparison.
It really is.
Yeah. But yeah, that's I mean, where were you all those years ago when I started out? And yeah, it's right. For a lot of podcasts, the difficulty is you have to put it together. And I don't really like editing so much. I know you're an editor. We'll talk about that a little bit. I like doing the podcast, releasing it, and it's a lot of work, and some people want transcripts, get that done, and getting links done, and sharing it, and so it does take up a little bit of time. But yeah, something more manageable, something that you can put into play. I think a podcast and with business in general, I think it's a little bit like if you've ever seen Hilary and Jackie, that movie about Jacqueline Dupre, the cellist, and she's devoted cellist, but she leaves the cello out on her balcony when it's snowing. I think we sometimes have that with podcasts, isn't it? It's a love-hate thing.
I think it can be, particularly if you end up like maybe taking on a bit too much and not giving you space to have time away from podcasts. I have been in that situation where I've tried to scale a bit too soon with my own shows and it's just become a bit of a grind. And that can really take out the fun and joy that goes into creating something that's wonderful that, can reach thousands of people, even more than that around the world and really create those connections. I think it's really important to kind of think about, what's manageable and not biting off too much and giving ourselves also time away to kind of get that creative inspiration and to rest. And also asking for help as well, not being afraid to kind of invite other people to help us to be part of the project, whether it is part of the business and you've got funding for that or even a voluntary project that you're working on. I think there's a lot to gain from building up a small team.
That's true, and for me, I think what you've said is correct, and what we're trying to do, I'm trying to do here with the podcast is get more variety in the podcast, because a lot of what I've been doing is, as the listeners can probably see, is we've had guests on about landing pages and marketing and branding, and these. But a lot of the interviews I've done is people owning businesses, and it seems I've done a lot of those interviews, and I seem to have run out of road a little bit, especially I think that the latest ones on Japan, because, I've interviewed a lot of people with businesses here in Japan, and I seem to be repeating it. And then it's like, I've nothing else really to say, it's like, well, how did you come to Japan? What's the difficulties of doing business in Japan? And then I'm like, bit spent.
Yeah. I wonder what your listeners suggest, though. I think this could be a wonderful way, rather than the pressure being on you, to think of these angles and what people need and like those areas of interest. And also, I think you do have similar conversations, right? But it's like, what's the angle that you're looking for here that could be different? I wonder what your listeners have to say in terms of like, what challenges are they facing? What questions and things that would they like to learn? Because I think they could be a huge source of inspiration for you. That's probably what I'd look to first, because I bet they have things that they really want to ask you, but they're just not here in the room with us right now.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's something the point you made in a few moments ago was we don't kind of reach out enough, do we? We don't ask. It's the important
Yeah.
thing.
It's
Another
strange,
question.
isn't it? Oh yeah, go
Yeah,
on.
it is.
Yeah,
So,
sorry.
sorry, no, for cutting across you there. But another question I had, and it's in the forefront of my mind here because he was a guest on the previous podcast, was Ryan Hageland. And Ryan is a business owner here in Japan, very successful with a number of schools. And I said that I was having a podcast expert on in a couple of weeks, and I would ask her this question because he asked me, and I ran out ran out of road again. So it was how to be a good podcast guest.
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? I've not been asked that actually for a while. Um, oh gosh, I think it's very much a partnership, isn't it, between the podcaster and the guest. So, like, if we take the example of what we've done today, we spent some time just before we hit record to kind of understand like who's the listeners, what is that you want to achieve, what sort of questions we're going to be talking about today. And I asked you about the tone and style in terms of like the how succinct my answer should be, how much depth you want me to go into. So I think really partnering and understanding what the podcast vision is and who the audience is a key thing to think about. And taking some time to think about like where you can provide value to that listenership, because that's ultimately going to not only boost the podcast and serve the listeners, but it also serves your brand as well in giving up your time to record something like this. If you're going to provide value to folk, that's only going to be a really positive thing for your business and brand. So there's just a few things, like see it as a partnership, think about, get to know really who the listenership is, what's the vision, what's the style, and then how can you best serve that with the expertise that you bring to the conversation.
And for the podcast host, it's a bit like the Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, as you probably know, living in Hong Kong, is we look at the moon, not at the fingers. So the idea is to point the people in the right direction, isn't it? Is to almost be in the background. I think as a host, I should be really in the background, and the guest should have the limelight. Is that a good way of looking at it, or are there different ways of approaching it?
I think it really depends on your style. It would be a shame if you disappeared too much into the background, because I bet your listeners follow you because it's you and they really enjoy the perspective that you bring to conversations and how you enrich conversations with sharing your experience, asking your questions that come to mind that are, fed from your experience of interviews and your work in education as well. So I think you have to think about what it is that you bring and how you can also create space for that. I give an example of a podcast I listen to that's not educational. I've been listening to it for well over 10 years, and that's the Mark Maron WTF podcast. Sometimes I listen to the podcast just to listen to his introduction because I'm such a fan of Mark and I love his introductions and like learning about what's happening with his cats and his comedy scene and all that sort of messiness that is his life. Sometimes I don't listen to the guest interview because the guest just isn't relevant to me. It's not a comic or artist that I particularly connect with, but I will definitely stay around to listen to the introduction. So I think it's important to create space for that, to build that relationship with your listeners, because you're the glue that keeps the show all together. So yeah, don't become too much into the background. I think definitely lean into what you can bring and what your experiences bring to the conversation.
Okay, and for somebody starting out as a podcaster, of course, we've all been over the how long are podcasts a thing? Are they 15 years? Are we talking, or maybe since the iPhone? Was it 2006? Wasn't it? I think maybe.
Yeah, 2005,
almost,
2006, around about then. Yeah,
almost 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gone by quickly.
It's gone by, and so good podcast to listen to for somebody who wants to be a podcaster. I'm sure everybody listens to the gardening or knitting or football, whatever. But for someone for the craft of podcasting, what would you reckon?
Yeah, so I recommend Ashley and Kane's podcast called The Podcasters Podcast. It's not easy to find when you search for it on Spotify. You're going to have to kind of lean into the searching for that. But it is called The Podcasters Podcast. And that's brilliant in kind of breaking down the nuts and bolts from recording to the promotion to the tech. They really lean into like frequently asked questions that are relevant wherever you are on your journey, whether you're just starting out or if you're an established podcaster. So I love listening to that because that kind of gives me fuel for thought in terms of where I can continue evolving. And it is like that, isn't it? Like with any craft, podcasting, you're always trying something new, or the next episode, you're going to try this, make this thing a little bit better. So I love that kind of space that they create for podcasters of all stages through their podcast. So yeah, I would suggest that folks check that out. It's a brilliant, brilliant show, and not too long either.
Great. And let's start at the beginning here for somebody who wants to start out with podcasting. I've thought as not so much now, but when I first started podcasting, you join all the groups, don't you, and the discussions, and the first one is always what equipment should I buy, and and some people, it's always the same discussion. Should I buy this one? Should I buy this audio interface? Should I buy this microphone? And always somebody comes up and just says, buy whatever is good enough and just start your podcast. Is that what you'd recommend as well? Or is there anything in particular you think people should have from the outset?
Well, I think most people overlook the space that you're recording in. That's probably the biggest thing that I don't see talked about enough, is like where you're recording is really important. So I can see like where you're recording, you've got a lovely heavy set curtain that will help to absorb the sound. You're in a room that has soft furnishings around you, which again helps to stop the sound from bouncing. You're in a good position to your microphone, so there's not a distance. So again, reducing the kind of reverb that's created in the room. So I think that's the first thing to kind of evaluate. Where do you have to record? That's quiet, that's small, that you can add furnishings to, whether it's cushions, curtains, rugs, or even those sound absorbing panels that are becoming a much more readily available in the main market now than what they used to be. This is the first step. And then there's no such thing as like, oh, this is the microphone, that's perfect. I think there's a perfect microphone for you, but there's no such thing as like one size fits all. And this is where we see microphones that have a certain status or a certain marketing campaign lead conversations, just because they've got really good marketing to go with it. So I'd say to folk who are just starting out, you don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds on a microphone. In fact, I think really consider again your space, and then maybe you have access to something that you could borrow, or maybe you already have a microphone that would do a pretty good job as you're starting out. Otherwise, really kind of just test out a few different models if you can in a store, but don't feel like you have to just go for the most expensive, because it can then be just too powerful, and then even if you cough or tap the table, it's going to pick up all the noise, and that can be difficult to kind of work with if you're working with like the very, very high end microphones. There's just a few things I think that I see in conversations on forums, for sure, but yeah, no kind of one perfect set to suit everybody, for sure.
Great. And as we didn't mention, of course, you are a video producer as well. So we want to go on to that. So I don't know if I should ask you questions, because I kind of have I always say the curse of knowledge here, because I've kind of asked all these questions in the past, and it just seems so long ago, and some things I take for granted, but I have to ground myself a little bit here. So getting podcast guests, how to choose a niche within a niche, and then get people to interview, and then get followers.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, if you're just starting out, I think it's good to kind of like brainstorm like who is your target audience, and then go and talk to them to actually test out your idea. So think about like very, very specifically, and I'm not just talking like ESL teachers, like that's too broad, like really specifically like ESL teachers at a certain level of experience that are teaching this form of ESL, for example. So get really, really intentional about like where they're at in their journey, and also how does your podcast serve them? Like what problem or challenge or opportunity is that person facing, and how does your podcast fill that gap? So before you even record that, like just brainstorm those ideas and then go and talk to people. That's what I do on my courses. Like we don't record and then go and talk to people and put it out there. Think about the idea and then do like just a very simple market research, which I know can sound a bit intimidating to folk, but it can be as simple as like just having a coffee with 5-8 people, just short conversations saying, hey, I've got this idea for a show. What do you think? And then just listening to their feedback and letting them ask questions. And that will help you just to kind of, to polish that idea. So that would be the first part, like kind of really finding your niche. It won't be perfect when you start out. just getting started, I think, going back to that mini series, putting it out there, and then looking at the analytics and getting some feedback as you go through that first mini series will help you to further lean into your niche and make confident decisions about, what you talk about, the topics, the titles, the guests you pick up for your show if you're doing an interview format. And you asked me about guests as well. I think when you're playing that first mini series, just think about the topics that really help to solve that problem for that specific listener. Like, what sort of questions and challenges are they facing, and who's best to talk about that in terms of their area of experience, and also how comfortable they are in being on a podcast. Because some people, it's not their thing. If they're going to feel quite uncomfortable on the microphone, then maybe you can obviously spend more time like coaching them a little bit and helping them prepare, of course, to make them feel comfortable. But maybe not choosing them for your first series, maybe choosing people who may have talked about it before in other spaces, because you're learning as well as a podcaster. So it's good to have an experienced guest with you to partner in that first series. There's just a few tips I would suggest really to get started. Have I answered your question? Because that was like 2 questions in one.
I know.
I was trying to remember, did I get that?
Yeah, and that's my fault, and that's perhaps something you could talk about as well. As I sometimes have a habit of asking 2-3 questions together. So maybe not a good idea is maybe ask one single question, then maybe a follow-up question.
Yeah, that'd be great. I was struggling to remember, what was the second part of that question as I was answering that, but I think I got it right.
Don't ask me, I've forgotten already. Yeah, so that's and actually I did take your advice, because I think I can't remember who my first guest was. I think it was Ian Simpson, who's it lives here in Japan, actually, originally from Wales, and he has 2-3 podcasts, surfing podcasts.
Wow.
He runs a few schools in Mia here in Japan. So I said to Ian, I'll interview you first because you're a seasoned podcaster. So yeah, I did, and Ian gave me some really good advice as well, and his podcasts are going really well. Ian, if you're listening, hello. I wanted to go on to videos, and specifically YouTube videos. Okay, so I'm kind of expanding things here, going to be producing a lot of videos over the next few months, and actually I'm taking to mind what you've said about not burning myself out as well. So that's something I'm going to have to reflect on. But it's like researching for podcasts and looking for equipment, that I started off like last few months, and you get TubeBuddy, don't you? It's kind of like an SEO program for YouTube, isn't it? I know there's another one as well. I can't remember, the name has escaped me now. I probably have that one as well. So there's TubeBuddy, which does the SEO, and then you watch all the videos about thumbnails, don't you? How to get the best thumbnail, and the best equipment, how to cut and paste your video. So do an intro, there's a tantalizing piece, and then answer that, and then leave it to the end of the video. So and then obviously do shorter cuts at the beginning, get them engaged, and so I've been learning a lot of stuff. But for one of the videos I came across, which looked blurry and badly produced but had a lot of followers, the person just made the point, just make good content and people will watch it.
That's the foundation for sure. Yeah, again, knowing your audience, what their problem is, and how your content serves them, and respecting their time. So like conveying what they're going to get from watching your video and really delivering on that. That is honestly the foundation for everything, because then people will be like, you know what, Phil's videos, this is worth my time. I'm going to subscribe. Oh, he's got a new video out. I'm going to watch this because I really learned a lot from that previous video. So I'm going to give you my time. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Really respecting our audience's time to deliver on what we say we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. And from there's some of the top YouTubers here. I don't, but I'm going to have to mention Mr. Beast on there. So that's everybody.
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of strange stuff going on. I've kind of lost track of what there was kind of some controversy going on with him, but breakdown. I think I've done this before with David Beckham, actually, on branding, and why David Beckham was so was so good at branding and why he was so successful. So, Mr. Beast, why do people watch it? I know it's probably teenage boys mostly that watch it, is it? Or I watched a couple of the videos, but I'm like thinking, yeah, it's a bit young for me. I don't know what his actual audience is, but
Yeah, it's probably aimed at a younger audience, but he has got quite a clear formula, hasn't he, that he's developed. And that's what's wonderful about when you do find your voice and what works for you and your audience. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You just need to kind of lean into that formula. So if you watch his video, he starts with a very strong hook. He's usually shouting.
yeah,
Usually it's something like, I've got 100 people here and they've got to stay in the circle. The last one standing in the circle wins £1 million, like high stakes sort of things. And then he kind of documents adding further pressure to the situation to kind of increase the stakes and keep people watching to see, what is the outcome. So that formula he's obviously tested, and that's taken quite a significant amount of time. He's been doing this for a long time. So he's refined that formula. He's invested in quite a significant production company as well. He set up his own production company to make sure it's really high quality. But I think that process of, he would have started with a few videos, tested it, refined it, each one a little bit, getting better and getting better, looking at people responding to it, comments, the amount of time that it's watched for, which YouTube actually has really good analytics in terms of telling you where the drop-off points are, how many people are watching, what's going well, and even suggesting topics as well. They've got that tool that they've added in as well, like what people are searching for that you could then create content around. So I think that's really helpful in kind of gauging, like, is this working for my audience? What's working, what's not? What can I adapt going forward? To refine your own style. I do see a lot of people that, like, for example, I had a conversation a few months ago with somebody who wanted just to be this other creator, like Stephen Bartlett, for example, who's a very well-known entrepreneur back in the UK. He wanted to do videos just like him and his podcast. And I advise people not to do that because although imitation is obviously a great compliment to somebody's craft, it isn't your voice and finding your voice. So unfortunately, you do have to go through the messiness of kind of trying a few things, seeing what works, and then refining it to take what works for you rather than trying just to copy somebody else. Because there'll be something that won't quite click, and you could be creating quite a lot of content for a long time trying to do a copy of what somebody else is doing, but it just won't work because it's not really leaning into what makes you original and authentic. Do you see that at all with YouTube videos that you've been researching as well, like copy paste with Mr. Beast and stuff like that?
yeah. Some of them are quite similar, aren't they? Even the thumbnails are similar.
Yes.
Yeah. There seems to be like the yellow text and just angry face or something provocative or clickbaity, isn't there?
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
never a great feeling, is it? When you click on something that you think is something and then you watch it and you're just like, oh no, this wasn't what I expected.
That's the ultimate sin, isn't it? In YouTube, because if you click on something and they're deceiving you, people don't want to be baited and switched, do they?
No,
Yeah.
no, they really don't. So I think it goes back to that point that you raised earlier, like even if it's low quality, but what you're putting out is great content, it's really valuable to your listeners and you're really serving them, then that's the way that's going to really build a strong foundation. And, the rest will take care of itself. But getting those foundations in place is key, and not making people feel like you tricked them into watching something. That's never a great feeling.
Yeah, it isn't, and there will be a drop off, won't there, as well with
Yeah.
viewers. But I've noticed also, and this is something that maybe you can answer is I've looked at the metrics, the viewer count on some of the channels, and some channels you'll see like they 500 viewers, 1,000, and then they have 500,000, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure for them, you mentioned earlier as well, is about testing, see what your audience likes. But I'm probably interested in a lot of the videos they put out, but I'm thinking, why is that one 500,000 and this one is 1,000? Maybe you'll have
Mm-hmm.
the answer there for me, or give me some ideas as to why that would be the case. Or
Yeah, I'd look at a few things because it could just be a really good title that's helped to kind of align with what people are searching for. So there's some keywords that really kind of complement that, the search trends that we're seeing. So it could be just literally that. And it may even be a video that they've gone back and they've made some changes to that title and the show notes, the description below the video, to kind of really align with what people are searching for. And that's what's propelled it further up the search results and encourage more people to click. So it's not necessarily the content itself. It could be those sort of factors as well. So I'd be looking at that, like, what is it about this? Is it because I've used the keywords here. Can I do that with the rest of my videos? Maybe change some of the titles and update them so they are more visible to people, so people are actually seeing my content. Is it because I did a promotional strategy for this? Like I posted on my LinkedIn and told people that this video was out. That's also something that people need to think about. It's not just enough just to post something and hope that people are going to find it. You do need to tell people about it. So I think you've got this wonderful audience already that are listening to your podcast. When you're ready to start posting videos, like tell them about it, like tell them about your YouTube channel and what's on there, so they are encouraged to go and discover it. So that's also another aspect. And yeah, I'd be looking at then the topic. Is there something about this particular topic that's trending? And if so, is there more in which I can explore in this that I can get into? So for example, with some of the videos I create for my own kind of creative portfolio, I find the editing ones are always really popular. So that's a good sign to me. I've put out a few now. I'm like, okay, I'll have to do more editing tutorial videos, and that's fine. It's definitely not the most exciting thing for me to make videos on, because it's a bit like, I don't know. I enjoy editing, but then explaining editing while editing a video, it's a little bit like, yeah, Inception, like I feel. But that's definitely something that's given me feedback. Like, this is definitely trending. People want this, they value it. So, and I've even got comments with people saying, hey, could you show me how to do a fade in and fade out for music? I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what people want.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Give them what they want and keep giving it to them. But you also mentioned the keywords. So I know we said about the content, but I noticed that from I was analyzing some videos and even some popular videos that like their keywords are not all great, or they're when you see the breakdown on TubeBuddy or one of these tools, actually they might have a video with 30,000-40,000 views, and they just skip the SEO and keywords altogether.
Yeah, or they've not updated it, because SEO is quite a changeable thing, isn't it? So what may have been a really good key term that people were searching for at that time may have evolved into something else or become really competitive. In which case, maybe you want to kind of move a bit further down the SEO kind of scale to get something that's a bit easier to rank higher in. So it's not kind of like one of these things that we plant and then like, there we go, it's a tree, it'll just grow. Like SEO does require some kind of going back to review, no matter what content you create, whether it's a blog, a vlog, or even a podcast. But it does pay off to do that, and it doesn't require too much time if it's part of like your regular, let's say you do it quarterly, or even at the end of the year, you just go back and see like, oh, this one, perhaps I could do some tweaking to the keywords here to update it to reflect this particular trend.
The problem is I'm probably wrong here, but I've done my research on videos, is that once you upload a video, to actually edit it, to add more content, you have to actually physically take down the video again, don't you? Or you have to re-upload it. Yeah. That's a bit of a disadvantage, isn't it?
I wouldn't suggest doing that. If you feel there's an update to do for that video, that's a great opportunity for you to maybe, if you really feel it's not serving the audience or it's confusing the audience, you may just put that as unlisted and then release a new one. Or you may just say like, oh, this is part 2. And you can even add a link to that at the end of that video, or a mention of it in the editing tool without making any edits, right? To say this is an update. Like this, I had this conversation last year. I talked about this. Let's do an update on this. So I do that with microphones, for example, because that's always a changing landscape. So there's always something to talk about what's happening with the latest podcasting and video microphones that people can use that's on the market based on what's trending at the International Broadcasters Convention every year. So yeah, you'll have content like that maybe you do like an annual kind of let's review it. Where are we now?
Yeah, the annual review is great, and if you want to get advertisers in, you can also put the scarcity in as well. You can say, we're closing the shop on this one. But another thing I've looked at as well, and is they do penalize you for duplication, don't they? On YouTube, I'm not sure you're as I say, I'm only a beginner here, but one thing people talk about is, should I do one long video or a series of shorter videos on each component? Or should I just do the short videos first and then just upload them as one video? What do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think to go back to kind of the creator themselves, I think it really does depend on your style and what's sustainable for you. For me, I really find long form videos actually take up a huge amount of time and effort and editing. So for me, that's not really a great fit, because obviously I'm running a business, I'm working with different companies to help them with their podcast shows and stuff. So anything I create myself, long form is just, and we're talking more than 15 minutes for me. That's like long form for me. But for me, doing a short video that's like, hey, I'm going to show you how to set up to record using this particular platform. I'm going to show you this in 3 steps. It's a 5-minute video. That's a lot more achievable for me. So I can happily commit to short videos that are very bite-sized and focused, and that works for my audience, and that also works for me. It's the difference between me creating and not creating. So I think that's the first question to ask yourself, is like, really, what can you sustain? And if you find that, long form is your jam and that's what you love doing, then go for a long form and then do some really nice time-stamped moments in the description, so you can chapter up that video for people that are visiting, that are just looking for that one specific thing, and maybe signal that as well in your video to say like, hey, if you're here for a specific thing, I've got the timestamps below, so if there's a specific question you're looking for, you probably find it there. So you're also not expecting your viewers to kind of muddle through and try and find the part that they've clicked on your video for, if they are just there for kind of a reference point. So yeah, those 2 points I'd consider: what's sustainable, what can you really sustain, and what can you lean into. And if you're doing long form, then how can you also think about those viewers that may just be there just to come here for that one thing. Depends on what's your video is going to be about anyway, Phil. What's your YouTube
well, actually,
about?
we're launching the EFL magazine a buyer's guide, so we're going to be doing a lot of content on TEFL courses, Celtic courses, etc. around the world, and location guides as well. And so more to come. I'm just this is just the trailer here, the first one. So so there's a lot to talk about. For example, even teaching English in Switzerland, you could split it up by country guide. What's the prices? How do you settle in? What's the how do you find accommodation? What kind of qualifications do you need? I mean, am I on the right track here? That's one kind of video. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're thinking about these videos, try and prototype one. So try and do a pilot and refine that pilot. The pilot will always take the longest time, and it can be a bit frustrating to like do that first episode. So let's say it's a country guide video that you're doing as part of that playlist. And that's a playlist, country guides for teachers. And I love the fact that you're thinking about that kind of human aspect of like, where on earth do you live? How do you rent a property? What's the rules with like shops here? If for Switzerland, for example, everything closes on a Sunday. I had no idea about that when I first moved here. Yeah. Those sort of things that if you're new here, what do you need to know to kind of, get settled so you can focus on, building a life here rather than, running ground after paperwork, which was kind of my experience when I first moved here. I think that's a really brilliant idea. So think about prototyping that with the first place, maybe Japan, because you're there. That would be the easiest one to prototype. And then you take that formula that works and then you apply it to all the other countries, whether you're asking other people to film it for you, you give them that as the model, the talking points. This is the type of footage I want. And there you go. And you've kind of got a lovely series then for that. So yeah,
great.
That's a brilliant idea.
Thanks for the encouragement. Yeah, it's something we talked about, the formula, isn't it? You get the formula done, nail. It's like a PG Woodhouse, isn't it? Every story is basically the same, but it's just hilarious, and he just changes a few details around here and there. So you don't have to reinvent, do you? Just have your own voice, as you say, and your own personality. One thing people talk about as well, talking about personality, is should the person go on camera or off camera?
Depends on the person, depends on your style. Some people are really not uncomfortable doing piece to camera, and that's fine. If it's not your thing, that's absolutely fine. It is lovely for people to see your face. I think it really helps to kind of build that human connection. And if you are concerned about how you appear on camera in terms of like, maybe you stumble or you make mistakes or you just don't think you sound that good, that can actually make you, it does make you more human and more relatable. And people who you want to resonate with will really appreciate that, like you showing up, and they'll go with you on your journey as you improve video on video practice. It's something you can learn. I think we have this impression that public speakers are kind of born, but they're really not. It's a skill, like any media, on camera or on podcasts. With practice, you will get better and you'll get more comfortable with it. So if that's the thing that's stopping you, I think give yourself some grace to be a beginner and to lean into that and that learning journey, not be afraid to show that. I think it'll make you so much more relatable to your audience. If it's a case of like, I'm not sure which is going to be best in terms of what will create the most views, or what's best suited for my audience and my creative style. I think coming back to that pilot again, by just committing to your pilot episode of like really refining that idea and trying a few ideas as you're putting it together, it will take a lot of time to put that first episode together, but it's worth spending that time because you can find what works for you, what you can repeat, what's sustainable, and what will ultimately help to align with what you're trying to tell, the story you're trying to tell. So I think, sorry, there's no one size fits all, Phil. I can't be like, yeah, definitely do this, but maybe these tips will help people to kind of be a bit more confident in spending some time on trialing that to find what works for them ultimately.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for such valuable advice. So I want to go back to more about what you do. So I introduced you as a podcast and video producer, but you're a lot more than that.
Well, I guess so. I think running my own business, you have to wear quite a lot of hats, right? It's I bet a lot of listeners will relate to that. So yeah, the producing part is one thing. So I do go into institutions and schools and produce content for them. So for example, Hamilton Brooks has a new podcast out called Primary Futures. So I worked with a studio, the talent, the executive producer, that's the person who has the money, to create the first season. And, my role included like prepping the talent, planning the episodes, piloting the first one, scripting that. And also the editorial feedback in terms of working with the tech team of editors in terms of what to keep, what to change, how to build that story to kind of create compelling content. Or, well, it was compelling. It's just kind of like polishing it into the format that we decided. So that's one aspect of what I do. And then I do training for people who are just starting out, particularly for a lot of small business owners I work with who want to do it themselves and start podcasting, start their first mini series or start their video series. I guide them through the process. So I have programs for that. And I have programs for those that are willing to grow as well, or ready to grow, I should say, who've been doing it for a while and want to experiment with either trying something new or scaling what they're doing. So a few different hats, I guess I wear in what I'm doing at the moment, but really enjoying it.
So if you were to give advice to somebody, let's say, listen to this podcast, maybe a budding entrepreneur, business owner in ELT, we mentioned before the podcast, I said I wouldn't mention that we mentioned before the podcast because we tried to keep it for this, but some people want to produce content for students, won't they? Or some people want to build business or get students to their business. So one idea, of course, and you see on not just podcasts, but TikTok is like people giving advice, and some of them not so good, are they? But there's like misspellings and everything. But there's a lot of English teachers out there, and I know. And I don't know how successful they are. I follow a lot on LinkedIn. I won't say follow, but they're in my feed, and you go there, and they put stuff out there on LinkedIn. So, as a school owner looking to get business, looking to attract students, what kind of ideas? Because I'm saying this because as is often the case that there's only a percentage of people will actually do a podcast, won't they? I mean, if there's 100 people, maybe one person will 5 people will consider it, maybe 2 people will end up doing it, won't they? It's just the way things are. So for people looking to start a podcast for a business, for school, where should they start?
I think so. From a school marketing perspective, I think it's a really good like top funnel brand awareness. So it's that kind of piece that will help people discover you and build the know, like, trust factor. So if you think about podcasts, really, you're asking people to spend, or inviting, I should say, people to spend maybe 15 minutes with you. That's quite a lot of quality time to spend with both prospective and also existing clients. And it's not placing a demand on your clients to also stop and watch something, which is quite demanding of people's time in the kind of attention economy that we're working in now as creators. Not that that's impossible if you want to do a video series, but if you are doing a video series, you have to kind of think about how you're going to keep people watching, which I think is less of a pressure for podcasts, which people tend to listen to. I mean, I wonder what your listeners are doing now while they're listening. They're probably doing errands or, doing chores or commuting or just doing something else. It doesn't expect you to stop and have to give its full attention. It can fit it around your life. So I think there's a lot of advantages from that perspective. To kind of go back to that perspective of like, okay, if it's your top funnel stuff, so it's helping build your brand awareness, establishing your credibility, One thing not to do as a school owner is just to simply teach. So don't do the stuff that you're doing in the classroom on your podcast. That's part of your product. And that's, if you want to use video and podcast as part of your product and services, great, but that's a different conversation. Don't hand it out for free. Because you'll just get people that just expect stuff for free. They won't convert into paying clients. That's the challenge there. So think about what's the dreams you're selling, what's the outcomes you're selling as part of your school or your education business or entrepreneurial offerings. Who's the ideal client you're working with, and then how can you tap into that? Because that's what people will really hang around for. So maybe you work, maybe you offer like business English courses for people at a certain point in their career. So maybe your whole podcast is about talking to people and interviewing people at a similar point in their career, and or even people that are just a step beyond and how they got there, and giving tips. Maybe that's your podcast. So it's important to think quite creatively and not just replicate what's happening in the classroom. Again, thinking about what's going to build your brand and really appeal to what your clients are working with you for, like why they come to you, what's the dream that you're selling and that you're helping them build, is a key thing. And is often something I see a lot of people miss, because it's comfortable, isn't it? Just to do, we see this with TikTok, just teaching videos. Here's a point to teach. Those people, even though they may have huge number of followings, don't necessarily have a business model. So I'd warn against looking at the very nice, attractive kind of following numbers as an indicator of how well they're doing in business.
So once you mentioned it, thank you for that nice segue there about what medium you should use. And, you mentioned TikTok, and it's true, isn't it? You can blow up on TikTok, but it doesn't mean anything. I mean, I don't know for TikTok, is it something like 16 to 20 or something is kind of the core viewership? Is, I don't know, they're very young, aren't they? I think TikTok.
But they're growing up as well with it, right? But it is a younger audience. You have to ask yourself, is your audience on this platform? Where is your audience hanging out? What are they doing? And where can you go and A, tell them about what you're creating, and B, kind of create content that they can easily find. So for me, like I with my own podcast that I have with my own portfolio, I target teachers who are very busy, who are very much on the periphery of conversations about development. They really don't have a lot of time. So that's why podcast works out perfectly for them, because, when I ask them, I do regular market research every year. And I ask them, what you're doing when you listen to the podcast. They say, oh, I'm commuting, I'm doing something else, I'm on a quick break. And I like the fact that I get a few ideas and I can take and try it out that week. So I think it's, if your audience is on TikTok and that's where you're going to target them, great. That's where you can create content. But come back to that question of like, who is your target audience? How are you going to serve them, and what's the best format for them?
So I know from Leah Sparrow, one of my guests. Hello, Leah, if you're listening. Who we've talked to a lot throughout the years. She pointed me in the direction of, I have it here behind my desk, because she said I was squirreling, going between different things. And she said, have one product, market it to one persona, focus on one traffic source, send that traffic source to one conversion mechanism, focus on this for 1 year until you've month-on-month overgrowth. So let's say we're going to leave out TikTok. So would we go for Instagram? Would we go for YouTube? Or how would we choose that? Which would, what kind of market we're looking for?
Again, I think it would depend on where your audiences hang out, how you want to target them. I think that's a really good question. I really love the simplicity of that model, by the way, that you just shared as well, like keeping things very simple, very clean and lean as you evolve and develop, and not trying to pack too many offers or too many things in and getting overwhelmed. I think it really helps to kind of build momentum. So that's a brilliant advice. I'd come back to maybe thinking about the big picture of like the content you can create that really answers common questions, concerns, speaks to those dreams, the clients you're wanting to work with, plan that, and then see if you can distribute it in ways to the platforms where they're hanging out. So an example of this may be a podcast, and then you take the clips from the podcast using like Descript, for example, has some amazing clipping tools right now that's really saving a lot of people time. And then maybe you post those clips on an Instagram account, or maybe it's on LinkedIn, because that's where your audience are kind of in that mindset for what it is you're talking about. So maybe instead of creating lots of little content, which you can do, I'd suggest maybe starting big picture content, slightly longer form, like a video of 10 minutes maybe for your YouTube series or podcast, and then putting that out there and then clipping it up and redistributing it into clips or audiograms if it's non-video. You can even use the text from the transcript to do some short text and visuals and carousel posts. You can use it for your newsletter if you have a newsletter, or even blogs if you have a website. So maybe I find that's a bit more sustainable to kind of go big picture rather than, it's more top down rather than bottom up kind of planning. And that way you're not thinking, I'm just going to create content for this platform, which leaves you at the mercy of those platforms changing and trends happening. We're seeing that with Twitter or X at the moment. There's a bit of a migration going to Blue Sky or Blueski, however it's said, and Threads as a result of what we're seeing there. So it's probably best not to lock yourself into one specific platform and creating content for that platform alone, because you can be then subject to the whims of trends and changes.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? And just getting back to like the length of videos, it really depends on, you know, what you want to watch, and the content. So, for example, if you're work related, it could be shorter. You can listen to it on the way to work, or you listen to it at your desk. But you know, maybe we want shorter bite-sized pieces, especially for teaching tips. But if I want to watch I know you've a history background as well. So if I want to watch a video on the Punic Wars, I could say, 3 hours. That's fantastic. I can like spend whenever I have time, and I can come back to it. But you know, I before I came on here, I actually, Chris Williamson, actually, I don't watch him that often, but he had some guest on about 5 things that will boost your life or something, and it was like 8 minutes, and I was like, okay, 8 minutes is just okay. I'll just last 8 minutes on that one. We do measure these things, don't we? We know how much time to invest, and if it's too long for what we're, you know, superficially interested in, or just want quick bite-sized answers, we're not going to listen to it or watch it, are we?
No, not necessarily. And I think it's really good for people that are creating content to think about, like, how can you repurpose that content into short clips that kind of convey to people in a short amount of time? What's in it for them, and why should they go and watch that 8-minute video, even if that's just a section of copy that you put on your LinkedIn post or your Instagram post that says, you know, this is a really interesting question that we explored today. So if you're thinking about this and this is the episode for you, and, you know, comment this for the link and I'll send it to you so you can watch it. So I think it's important to kind of think about how we promote that and how we convey to people what the value is for them, so why they should go. Again, coming back to that, respecting people's time, and telling people about what we've created for them, and not just expecting to put something out there and then, yeah, of course they'll watch it. Well, yeah, maybe they won't, because maybe they haven't built that trust with us yet, where they know that, oh, you know, 8 minutes spent watching this video. Oh, I watched one last week. That was brilliant. Yeah, I am going to sit down. You haven't built that relationship yet with that potential audience member. So thinking about how you kind of tell them and signpost them to where your content is and what it could bring them is pretty key.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about your business. So once we're here, and how you're doing, and of course, you don't have to tell us your under the hood or your secret formula or anything, but tell me about customers you're working with at the moment, and how you can help new customers, potential customers.
Yeah, so it's been an exciting year in business. I've just passed my first year in business, which it's been a learning curve, which I'm sure a lot of, and yourself can relate to. You learn a lot in that first year, right? So what you mentioned earlier about that kind of keeping things lean, and really just leaning into that one offer and really refining that has been something I've definitely focused on this past year. So one of the things I help people with is starting podcasts. So that's a huge thing, because there's so many people who haven't started yet and find the tech or just the intimidation of the time that can be spent on creating something such as a podcast quite intimidating. So the Podcast Pathfinder has been like my flagship program that I've been refining over this past year. And I work with a lot of teachers, trainers, educators who may be like copywriters in education, or like entrepreneurial folk who work in the education realm, who want to start podcasting and want that guidance over, like, how do you develop an idea? How do you plan that first mini series? How on earth do you script your first episodes? And how do you line it with your business goals as well? So you're not forgetting that part, and so it can work for your business and what you want to achieve. So that's one of the big things I've been working on. It's been a real joy to kind of work with people. For example, a client's brought podcasting to her school, an academy in Spain. Another one's brought it to her language coaching business, and I have others that are, transitioning from working for a company to setting up their own company and wanting to use their podcast very much as a point to kind of start building their brand and putting themselves out there more and building a portfolio that really belongs to them. So I love the fact that it attracts so many different people and how they're utilizing this media to take them forward and to serve people as well. It's brilliant.
It's exciting times, isn't it? Because I
Really is.
remember watching when I was a kid, there was a TV program called Press Gang. Do you remember that one with
No, I don't remember that
oh, it
one.
was
What was that
before that was
about?
kind of 80s. It was about like a school newspaper. Was it a school
Yeah.
newspaper? I remember Dexter Fletcher was the main guy in it, and there was somebody else maybe. Um, I can't remember who the girl was in it, but they were like kind of teenagers. I was around the same age, but it was kind of cool. You have like your own school newspaper. Now we have our own school newspapers, we have our own TV studios, we have our own radio studios, don't we? And
Mm-hmm.
it's exciting times for kids and teenagers and college students.
It really is. And I think for those that may not feel that they haven't built that yet, it doesn't mean you have to have like a high-end studio to record stuff. You can kind of set up your own studio in small spaces, where that's a small classroom, or even if for those working from home, like a space in your office as well. Like studios can look different for different places depending on the resources and the space you have available, but it's very much more achievable now. And I'm seeing it like companies and individuals setting up a recording booth. I know people who record in like their laundry room because that's a really good space for acoustics. And nobody knows if you're only doing audio only. Nobody has to know that you're recording in a closet or a laundry space, which I think is I think it's really exciting how creative people are being in kind of setting up these spaces to create content that can potentially go out and reach so many people and enter new markets that they haven't ever visited before.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that when I started the magazine, all those was almost 10 years now. And
Mm.
when I first was like, oh my God, there's people in Ecuador, people in in
Yeah.
Pakistan, and it's just
Amazing.
yeah, it is, isn't it? But we couldn't have done that before. But so thank you very much for coming on today, Laura. I learned a lot, and I hope the listeners learned a lot as well and are inspired to start their own businesses on podcasts. If people want to get in contact with you, I'll put the information in the show notes anyway. But is there anything you're working on at the moment that you like collaboration or
Yeah,
some
there's a few things in the pipeline, some really exciting projects that I unfortunately can't talk about yet because I'm just waiting to sign off contracts. But I think what listeners may be most interested in is that I'm creating a video course for those who want to create short form video that may be quite shy in being on camera or not sure about what to create for putting themselves out there. So that's something I'm creating because people ask me for it. They've been asking me for it for about 6 months now. So I'm like, okay. I think there's a demand for it. So if you want to learn more about that or the podcasting I do, go to communicatingforimpact.com.
communicatingforimpact.com. And I connected with you on LinkedIn. You're on Twitter and all the other
I do
places?
Instagram and I do LinkedIn, and that's as much as I can do. I think you have to think about
Yeah,
how much headspace we have as
I
business
know.
owners. They're the two
Yeah.
spaces that I love to hang out. So depending on your preference, folk can follow me on LinkedIn or Instagram. The content's slightly different. I think Instagram's a little bit more fun and get to see a lot more behind the scenes, whereas LinkedIn is definitely more for the kind of professional uh, kind of crowd. It's a different vibe, isn't it, on LinkedIn
Yeah, it's
compared
a
to
bit
other
stuffy,
platforms?
really, isn't it? And
Yeah.
self promotional, and I'm super stoked, and I'm so happy, and
Oh,
everything
I'm
is just
thrilled. That's the line I
yeah,
see all the time. Yeah. Are you really
yeah.
thrilled? Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I think to be honest, I think people gilding the lily a bit on LinkedIn, but that's all
Mm,
all part of it. I mean, there's as you mentioned, there's some people are shy, aren't they? And they don't do it
mm.
enough, and then people are they're doing it too much maybe. So there has to be we have to get them in the room together and get them to give each other advice. So thanks again, Laura, for
It's been
coming
an
on the
absolute
podcast.
pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.